Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Bless us with thy divine qualities, with peace, with joy, with love. Help us feel them within and express them without. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Okay, they're taking away my extensive notes. This evening, Devi G and I have been requested to talk on the subject of finding peace within and without. And it's a very important topic. It's the topic that is the central theme of the Bhagavad Gita and of the Mahabharata, even though that seems to be a scripture that talks primarily about warfare. It really is a scripture that talks about peace, but it takes some understanding to realize that. When I first read the Bhagavad Gita, I was very new on the spiritual path, and I had only met Swamiji, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months earlier, and I had taken a couple of classes. And so this was in America's history during the time of the Vietnam War. And there were many young people, including me, who were very opposed to that war. And so when I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I came to the part where Arjuna explained to Krishna all of the reasons why he should not fight, I was saying, yes, yes, Arjuna, that's perfectly right. You're absolutely right. And then imagine my dismay when Krishna told him that he had to fight and he had to take up his arms and essentially he had to annihilate his enemies. And I almost left the spiritual path. It was a great crisis for me, that teaching in the Bhagavad Gita, because I was feeling that what this world needs is not more warfare, not more conflict, not more enemies and people taking up arms against enemies, but what it needs is peace. What it needs is the ability for people to get along with each other. And so it was quite a severe test. I remember after I read that, it comes very early on. It comes at the end of the first chapter of the Gita, the beginning of the second chapter. And when I read that, I kind of put the book down in disgust, and I took a long walk. I was camping in a very peaceful spot where there were these giant redwood trees and silence all around and greenery. And I took a long walk amongst those trees, and fortunately I came to my senses in the sense that I realized that perhaps, just perhaps, Krishna and a scripture that has lasted for 2,000 years or longer has more wisdom in it than a 23-year-old rebel. And so I said, well, there must be something deeper in this than what I'm able to see just with my consciousness. Now, this was naturally long before we had the scripture of Master available to us on the essence of the of the Bhagavad Gita. And so it was having to begin to grapple with these questions inside without an outside interpretation. But at least I did know this. I knew that I should be humble and not assume that I knew everything, especially in regards to such an important scripture. And then I went on to read the rest of the Gita, and it was very heartwarming and, in a sense, very familiar. I'm sure that I have had lives in India before, and that I was familiar with the primary teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. But I want to come back to this question of how do we find peace? Do we find peace through warfare? Well, not outwardly. That is certainly not true. You can take a look at certain areas of the world that have been at war for centuries and centuries, where one side, in the Middle East, for instance, among the different groups there's been warfare from one group to another for almost all of recorded history. And so, are we going to achieve peace by one side in a conflict having enough power to suppress the other side? Peace does not come that way. Certainly not the kind of peace that we're talking about tonight, because all that results from warfare of that nature is resentment, and that resentment is held until revenge is possible, and then you simply have more warfare. And that cycle goes back and forth forever and forever. Swamiji had an interesting dream one time. He dreamt that he had been greatly misused by someone else, and that finally he was in a position to gain revenge over that person. And it was very tempting to do so, but then in his dream, he said he realized even in the dream that if he went ahead and found his revenge over the other person, that in the next life, that person would have to find his revenge over him. And the cycle would go on until one of them or both of them decided to end it. And he said, I will end it now. And he sent out a great wave of love to that person. And in the dream, this was all taking place in the dream. So we know these teachings on a conscious level, but to be able to feel them and express them in the subconscious, that's more difficult. And so even in his subconscious mind, he was saying that there has to be an end to this conflict, and I will end it now. And by sending out a wave of love, that ended that conflict. Because you see, what happens in this world, this world is, one might say, made up of the fabric of duality. And one of the aspects of duality is that there are always pairs of opposites that work one with the other. Light and dark, health and disease, birth and death, on and on. Everything has its opposite. And so if we cannot overcome these opposites, it's the conflict inherent in creation itself that creates the outer condition of not having peace. And so for us, what we have to do is to realize that we cannot find peace by somehow changing the fabric of creation or by changing something outside of ourselves. We cannot find peace through warfare. We cannot find peace through revenge. We cannot find peace through winning an argument. We cannot find peace by imposing our will on others. None of that will bring us peace because it's always outside of ourselves. And the real lesson of Gita is that warfare, that battle of Kurukshetra, is not outside of ourselves. It's inside of ourselves. And it's only there that we can begin to find peace. So the first step toward finding peace within and without is to realize that we cannot ever find it without until we find it within. Now, these sound like lofty teachings, and probably everyone here has some acquaintance with Gita and knows the basic premise of this. But it's one thing to know a teaching, and it's another to apply a teaching. One time, Swamiji was trying to correct me in how I worked with people. He said that I had a tendency to override their willpower a little bit. Basically, he said, let them make their own mistakes. Don't try to guide them so much that they don't make mistakes. And because I had been a general manager of Ananda community for many years at the beginning. And so he was giving me this advice, and I said, I understand, Swamiji. And he said calmly but firmly, he said, I don't care if you understand or not. I want you to change. And see, we can understand these lofty teachings, that we can't create peace outside of ourselves without first creating it inside of ourselves. But as soon as the first test comes in the morning, we want to control the environment around us. We go into the office and we want to tell others, perhaps, don't make so much noise, or don't go there, or don't do this. Isn't it true that we constantly are trying to maneuver the environment around us in such a way that it pleases us, that it conforms to what we want, and that we want other people to behave in a way that we want them to behave because then we'll be happy? Well, it just does not work that way. You could get everyone in the world to do exactly what you wanted them to do. And would that make you happy? No. You know what it would make you? It would make you bored. You would soon be trying to rile up some conflict just in order to have something interesting in life. And so outer control is not going to lead to happiness. The thing that leads to happiness, and this is such a simple teaching that it becomes hard to practice it, the thing that leads to happiness is the decision to be happy. And that does not depend on whether other people are doing what you want them to do or whether they're not. Master said all conditions are neutral. It's how we react to those conditions that make them seem positive or negative. And positive and negative are another way of describing duality. That reactive process within us creates ongoing sense of duality. And so peace, one could describe, is a diminution or a leveling down, a reduction of opposites. That's what conflict is, one side against the other. If you don't have one side against the other, then you have peace. So peace is almost as if it's a negation of conflict. What results is peace. So if we want a negation of conflict, we have to not create conflict within our own self. And where does that conflict start? It starts with expectation. It starts with, I want this and I don't want that. I like this and I don't like that. People should be this way and not that way. It starts with these expectations. And when we have those expectations and act in such a way that we try to fulfill those expectations, we, in that very action, condemn ourselves to a time of not having peace, of not being peaceful. Because Patanjali says, Yogas chitva vritti nirod. Yoga is the neutralization of those desires for likes and dislikes. And when we neutralize that, that's when we have peace. When we neutralize the expectations and the desires, that's when we have peace. And so, how do we do that? Well, that brings us right back to the Gita. The advice to Krishna to Arjuna to fight was not advice to fight outwardly, not advice to annihilate the Kauravas because they were bad people. It was the advice to annihilate those tendencies within ourself that keep us constantly at a state of non-rest or non-peace. So who was Arjuna being instructed to fight against? Was it Duryodhana? No. It may have taken on the name of Duryodhana, but Arjuna was being told to fight against material desire, fight against anger, fight against lust, fight against jealousy, fight against the negation of other people. All of those worldly tendencies. What does worldly, we use this phrase, worldly tendencies, worldly tendencies. What does that mean? Does it mean that we want to go out and have parties all the time? That's not what it means. Worldly tendencies means in essence that we think our happiness can come through the world. And therefore we go out into the world seeking our happiness. And Arjuna is being told by Krishna to annihilate those tendencies. So it isn't that peace can be achieved just by somehow wishing that we were peaceful, because we have these tendencies within ourselves, and it's overcoming those inner tendencies that is the essence of the spiritual path. And so how do we begin to overcome those tendencies? Well, first of all, if we want to achieve peace, then I've already been talking about how we need to not have desires and expectations and ups and downs and all of the duality, likes and dislikes and all of that. Where do those arise from? Why do we have them in the first place? It's because each of us, one could say, is a being of prana, is a being of consciousness. And as long as we do not have control over the flow of prana within us, we will not have control over our mind. And if we don't have control over our mind, one could say, is created in order to be restless. We have to overcome the tendency of the prana to rile up the mind, to keep moving all of the time, because the mind is naturally restless. when that happens. The desires naturally arise. And so if we want to find peace, the way to find peace is by pranayama, or control of prana, control of energy. And that is exactly what our spiritual path is here to help us do. So everything that Master brought, all of the teachings, this is the religion of this age for Dwapara Yuga that is coming down from Babaji through Lahiri, through Sri Yukteswar, through Master, and spreading out into the world. The religion of this age is ultimately Kriya Yoga, but Kriya Yoga is just a technique. It's deeper than that. So what it really is the control of prana. It's the control of the restless energy itself. So Anandamoy Ma said that once we overcome the tendency to have these desires, it's as if we pull the plug on a fan, and that fan, the blades of that fan still rotate for a little while it loses momentum, but then it stops. But if you leave that fan plugged in, you aren't going to achieve a point of non-motion of those blades by shouting at it, or by saying you shouldn't be in motion, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be spinning around. The Gita says don't do that. Master says don't do that. How are we going to achieve real success that way? We can't achieve success that way. And so what we have to do is we have to pull the plug on that prana. Well, I pull the plug on the fan. Well, what that plug is electricity going to the motor. And electricity is, Master called it the animal energy form. And so prana is finer than that. So if we want the mind to settle down, we have to pull the plug on the restlessness of prana. And when we can do that, then we can finally achieve a sense of peace. And so, by the practice of energization, many people think that those energization techniques are just some physical thing and we don't really need to do them. But they're the fundamental basis of learning how to control this prana. So, energization, Hong Sa, Om, Kriya, all of these techniques on our path, all of them are basically helping us to pull the plug on the fan, on the restless spinning of the mind. And it's when we pull the plug on that finally the mind begins to settle down. And when the mind begins to settle down, then we will begin finally to experience peace. Because peace is not something that we need to learn. Peace is part of our own intrinsic nature. Our intrinsic nature is God. We're made in the image of God. And so when we experience our own self, then we experience ourself as God and as the aspects of God. And one of those aspects is peace. And so, again, in Patanjali, he says that yogas chittva vritti nirod. Yoga is the neutralization of these likes and dislikes. And when we are in the state of neutralization, then the seer rests in his own self. And when we rest in our own self, then we experience ourself as peace. We experience ourself as love. We experience ourself as joy. At all other times, the next sutra says, at all other times, the seer is subject to the ups and downs of the external world. And so if we don't rest in our own self, we will not achieve peace. We will achieve some of it, but it won't last very long. And so the real method of achieving peace is to daily meditate as deeply as possible, because meditation is the process of pulling the plug on that fan. And just pulling the plug is probably a wrong image. Now it's on like a rheostat, where you can turn it on to high or on to low. So for most of us, meditation is not pulling the plug, but it's at least turning down the speed of that fan. And so to go as deeply into the peace of meditation as possible is the first step, and then hold on to that inner peace as we go about our daily life. And then something very strange begins to happen. When we ourselves are able to hold on to our own inner peace, the reactive process commands others around us to begin to grow more peaceful. If we go in angry, we create the magnetic response of anger in another person. If we go in restless, we create restlessness in other people. But if we start our daily tasks by feeling calm and peaceful and uplifted, the people around us gradually become calm and peaceful and uplifted. So peace begins with us finding our inner peace, and then it spreads out. And the stronger and the longer you can hold on to your own inner peace, the more you will become a kind of bubble of peace that affects everything around you. But if you can't find your own inner peace, you are never going to find it by somehow ordering others to be peaceful. We were at a movie opening a couple of weeks ago, and there was a man there who was in charge of serving food or catering the food. And he was treating the people who were the waiters in a terrible manner, just shouting at them, get that, faster, be there, well, go there. And you could see these fellows running, but you could also see in their eyes kind of a sense of resentment toward being treated this way. And so whatever we put out, we are going to get back. Put out peace, and you will get back peace. Put out the opposite, anger or restlessness, and that's what you'll get back. So the key to everything is to fight the battle within, just as Krishna told Arjuna. Conquer your own inner enemies, and when you do that, then the world around you will respond that way.
Good evening, everyone. I'll also share a few words with you this evening. Recently, Jyotish and I watched a very interesting documentary movie called The Pacifist. And it was a true story of a young man during the Second World War who chose not to engage in military warfare, who chose to be a conscientious objector. But he had medical training, so he was willing to go with the advancing army and the American soldiers, but only to rescue those who were wounded. He would not pick up a gun. And it was a very beautiful and really quite miraculous story. At first, the other soldiers in his division mocked him, and because they thought, oh, you're a coward, you won't fight, the rest of us are putting our lives on the line. And in fact, there were some incidents where they beat him up, where they treated him very badly. but he just radiated peace. He said, I'm not doing this out of cowardly consciousness. I'm doing this because I believe in the power of peace. And then when they actually got into battle, he would go in the middle of crossfire, very heated crossfire, and he would rescue the wounded soldiers in his division. And little by little, they came to realize the great value of what he was doing. And then they even interviewed, this was in the Pacific Theater, so in the islands off the coast of Japan, they interviewed Japanese soldiers who were members of the opposing army, and they said, yes, we saw this man. And one man said, I tried to kill him 3 times. I leveled my gun at him. He was directly in my sights. My gun jammed. I got a different gun. I aimed at him. Somehow the bullet it seemed to go around him. He said, 3 times I tried to kill him, and all 3 times I could not do it. And then something within me said, stop trying. This is wrong. This is a different kind of a man. And so great was the power of his peaceful, and he was very humble. When they asked him about this, he said, I don't know. All I know is I was trying to rescue my brothers, my comrades in arms. And so it was a very, very powerful story, the courage of living in peace. It took tremendous courage to do what he did, more than those who were defending themselves with guns. But as Jyotish was saying, in our own daily lives, peace is a choice. But it also involves, once we make that choice, just as any choice we make in life, it takes the energy and the commitment and the follow-through and the self-discipline to succeed in that choice. So in our daily lives, there are virtually every day, there are opportunities present themselves to us to be centered in this peace. How many times adverse circumstances come and we think, oh, this is terrible. Why is this happening to me? But if we can stop and we can say, I choose to find peace even in the midst of these adverse circumstances. I live in peace, I affirm peace. Another story, I don't know why many military stories are coming to me, but I guess war is an allegory for, as Jyotish was saying, for the inward battle. But this was another story. This was from the Vietnamese War, and it was a story that we read of one of the American pilots who was shot down and spent many years in what they called the Hanoi Hilton, which was essentially a prison in the city of Hanoi. And these American soldiers, some of them were there for many years and were inflicted with daily torture. And one man who was very devout in his faith, he was a Christian, but every day when they would drag him into this torture chamber, he would just pray. He would pray to Christ. He would repeat as many of the prayers he remembered from the Bible, but he continually, and finally after a number of years, they dragged him in, and he said, I was so ill and so weak, I had nothing left. I had no resistance. I had no ability to remember the words of the Bible that gave me strength and comfort. And in that moment, he just said, Lord, you have to take over now. And in that moment, he said he felt this wave of peace, just peace and protection envelop him. And he looked at the man who had been torturing him for these many years daily. And he looked at him and he said, don't you understand? Nothing you can do can hurt me. And the man began shaking. It was as though he touched the deepest part of this other man's soul, and he ran out of the room, and he would never touch him again. He would never harm him again. But that ability in extremis to just say, I choose to find and live in the peace of God. And if we move forward in that way, the universe supports us. And is it easy? No, it's not easy. It's a lot easier to capitulate to hatred and anger and a sense of victimization. But if we say everything that comes, there is the potential to live in the peace of God, no matter how difficult it seems, then we find, and if we follow that up with the self-discipline and the repeated affirmation of what that consciousness is, then we find that a sense of peace is with us always. Another way we lose our peace is simply mental worry. We just start, what if this happens? And very often, I find in my own life, I don't know if this is true for you, about 95% of the things I worry about never happen. And so I realize if I start worrying, there's a pretty good chance it won't happen. But sometimes I've gone through periods where my mind just is like a little squirrel in a cage, just running and running. What if this happens? What if that happens? And on like that. I once was going through a period where someone that I cared about very deeply, a family member, was going through a very difficult time, and I was very worried for that person. But I found I was thinking about it all the time. And finally, I chose peace, and I chose not, I said, I've got to take control of my mind here. And so I just said, I will stop worrying about this. It's not doing anyone any good. And so I just affirmed, I will not worry. And when the little thoughts started coming, I would push it away with all of my energy. And interestingly enough, within a matter of weeks, the situation turned around for that person and everything began to go well. And I realized that worrying is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we worry and worry that this will happen, then we draw those circumstances more strongly. But if we just say, I give this to God, whatever happens, my worrying will not make it any better or worse. A friend of mine, for those of you who know him, Haridas, Nayaswami Haridas, who heads up our center in Bangalore, he said his mother had a very nice sense of humor, but she would worry a lot too. And once she was worrying about something and then everything turned out fine, and she said, my goodness, I wasted a good worry on that one. And so just to realize we have the choice to worry about impending difficulties or not. And if they're going to happen anyway, then we'll deal with them when they come. But why waste the time dwelling in theoretical problems? Another way that we can affirm peace and live it is, let's say you really have a goal in mind. You want to pass your exams, or you want to get a new job, or whatever it might be, all the difficulties of daily life. But if we go after our goal, and Yogananda's teachings really affirm using our willpower and our energy to accomplish goals. So it's not that it's wrong to try to achieve things in our life, but if we do it with a sense of attachment to the results, that's where we begin to lose our peace of mind. So if we work with tremendous effort and energy, but then at the end of the day say, Lord, this is yours. I'm doing the best I can to bring this about, but ultimately success will only come with your grace. So it's not that we're passive, but we take out that element of anxiety, of, oh, this has got to happen, and what if it doesn't? And we just do our best, and then we're able to walk away. And as was mentioned earlier, Jyotish and I have been a part of the Ananda work for many years, since 1969 for me, somewhat earlier for Jyotish. But so many times over those years in working with Swami Kriyanandaji, we have watched him just undertake projects that seemed impossible. And I have to be honest with you, some of them worked beautifully, Some of them never came about. But in whether they worked or didn't work, his consciousness was the same. He was inwardly at peace because he wasn't attached to the results. So whatever we're doing in life, try to do it from that sense of peace. And we were just talking about this story earlier today with a friend. There was a story that Swami Kriyanandaji tells from the life of our Guru Deva Yogananda, where there was a man in the organization who had betrayed Yogananda. He had spoken against him and tried to undermine him. And another one of the disciples found out about this. And he went to see that man, and he was angry, and he was denouncing him and letting everyone know what he had done, the bad things this man had done. And Yogananda called the faithful disciple up to him later, and he said, "Your intentions were good, but if you had done it without anger, it would have been all the better." And so even when you see a righteous cause, we don't need to identify the other person as our opponent. We can just say, this is where truth is, and I will state my truth, and I will, not my truth, but I will try to state the truth objectively, without animosity, without anger, but just trying to relate to whatever you do with a sense of inner freedom. And then the last instance of how we lose our peace, of course, it's in dealing with other people. People disappoint us, people hurt us, people may betray us, but again, we can choose to walk through life with a sense of peace. One of Yoganandaji's, he said it was his second most advanced male disciple. His name was Yogacharya Black. And he was a great yogi. He lived in the United States, in the state of Michigan. And he created a beautiful retreat center. And he, one day there was a big fire, and his retreat center burnt, the temple burnt to the ground. And when this happened, Yogacharya Black withdrew to his apartment and then came out several hours later, and he was just radiant and happy. And no one could figure out, well, isn't he relating to the fact that this beautiful temple burnt down? And Yogacharya Black said, "For many years, I have chosen and disciplined my mind," and these are the two pivotal points, the choice and the discipline. "I have chosen and disciplined my mind to live in a bubble of peace, and I never let anything or anyone intrude on that bubble of peace." And he said, when the temple burnt down, I'd almost started to erode and get inside my bubble of peace, but then I withdrew and I meditated, and now I'm fine. So to live in that bubble of peace, no matter what other people do. Once there was a man who spoke very negatively against Swami Kriyanandaji, and there was a public gathering, and this man was present, and Swamiji, who was always so direct with people, he never kind of dissembled or tried to avoid people. Swami went right up to this man and he said, "You know, and these are the words he used. He said, I could be the devil incarnate, but you know, it just isn't your problem. Your problem is to be happy in yourself." And the man kind of bustled off and left. But that's the truth. It's when someone has ill intentions towards us, we just need to say, I'm not going to let anything erode my peace. And my problem is my own self. My choice and my discipline is to live in that peace. Is it easy? No. If it were easy, this whole world would be a paradise. But Yoganandaji said, all of our life's experiences are for our entertainment and education. And if we see all of life in that way, this is coming to me for my education so that I can choose to live in a deeper, more God-attuned way. And then finally, with the practice of meditation, someone asked me yesterday, we were having a little satsang at Noida, And a woman who, very fine woman, who had just begun meditating, she asked me, what personally have you gotten out of the practice of Kriya Yoga? And I thought, that's a very good question. And I said, let me give that a moment's thought, because I don't want to just, bounce back to you some predigested statement. But I want to think about it. And I thought, the practice of meditation and Kriya Yoga, which is Yogananda's most advanced technique of meditation, has given me the ability to have an objective distance between myself and the events around me. So I have that ability to stand back and to make those choices in the moment, not just rush in emotionally, react without control, but that, and I've really found in my own life the difference between harmony with other human beings is often a matter of seconds. It's those few seconds between when something happens and you react. And if you can control those few seconds, you will find harmony with other people. But if you don't control and you just say whatever comes to your mind or react or so are you and whatever it might be, that's when disharmony begins. So choosing peace reinforced by the practice of meditation and Kriya Yoga and the objectivity it gives you to have those few seconds where you say, wait, I don't have to react. I can choose to be a person of peace. Yoganandaji said, the yogi should be able to stand unshaken amidst the breaking of crashing worlds. And we all, to some extent or another, watch the world around us crashing and turbulent, but we can find a way to become peaceful. And to the extent that each one of us does this, it begins to change the consciousness of everyone around us. And that's like a great, you throw a rock in a pool and it radiates out in circles. Well, you throw a person of peace in the pool of turbulent humanity, and it begins to radiate outward, and it begins to create ripples of peace that change the lives of people everywhere. I'll just close. With this image, there's a beautiful book about the life of Buddha. And it's a poetic rendition. It's been translated into English, The Light of Asia. And it describes the moment when Buddha achieved enlightenment. And it said, in that moment, all over the countryside, people that were arguing or at odds with each other, they began to see the potential for harmony and peace. And children that were angry, they became peaceful, and the flowers began to just feel the beauty of the breeze. And this great wave of peace settled and blessed all of the world through that one man, that one great soul, achieving enlightenment and finding oneness with the peace of God. And so for each of us, we don't do it only for ourselves, but we are like a great network of humanity. And this great network, we affect each other much more than we know. Let us choose to live in peace, to discipline those qualities that we need to maintain that peace, to forgive, to bless, to be channels of the consciousness of God, which can change the world that we know today. God bless you. There was a question that you're summoning up your questions.
Your courage to ask a question.
Someone asked us a question before the satsang. What if your partner, your parents, the people you live in close association with, what if they are not sharing your spiritual interests? How can you pursue a spiritual life then?
Oh, no, I didn't mean for her to ask the question as much as I meant for her to answer the question. See, the expectation that she was going to answer it has already created an unpeaceful feeling in my... So, there's a variety of things. It's not any easy answer to a question like that. First of all, we have to make a resolution within ourselves to pursue the highest that's within us and pursue that which we know will lead not only to our own happiness, but to the happiness of others. So, for instance, if one has a spouse that is not on the spiritual path, as long as that spouse is allowing us to pursue the spiritual path, then we should just accept that situation. Every individual in the world has the right and the ability to make their own choices. The true spiritual path cannot be imposed on anyone. And so a spouse needs to come to the decision to pursue a spiritual path on his or her own time. So Swamiji has said that as long as the spouse is supportive, more or less, of our spiritual search, then we should just accept that as the condition and work with that. If the spouse tries to block us from our spiritual search, then that becomes another question. If the spouse or parents or some person outside of ourself tries to tell us, no, you cannot pursue a spiritual path, or you cannot do it as seriously as you are doing it, at that time we have to make the decision strongly that regardless of what they say, we are going to go ahead and pursue the spiritual path. Ananda Ma put it this way: a lower duty ceases when confronted by a higher duty. Our highest duty, in fact our only true duty in life, is to seek God and try to know God. And so as long as the world doesn't actively oppose us, as long as the environment around us doesn't oppose us, then we can go along with it. If it opposes us, then we have to be firm and be firm in ourselves. And obviously it's not easy to do sometimes. Sometimes this becomes one of the most difficult tests that we will have in a lifetime. But nonetheless, if we allow the environment or someone that's close to us to dictate to us that we are not going to be able to pursue our spiritual path, then we can only wait for another lifetime in order to pursue the spiritual path, and honestly we'll be confronted with the same problem again.
I would just add one thought to that. If particularly your spouse is not interested in the spiritual path, don't exclude them from your consciousness, from your spiritual activity. So when you're meditating or praying to the form of God that you hold most dear, feel that your partner is a part of that you're not creating a division in your life. But even if they're not interested in meditating, you meditate for them and try to pray for them that they can feel God's consciousness. And, you know, everyone has a different way of worshiping God. There's a beautiful story that Swami Kriyanandaji would tell us from the life of the great Indian saint Mirabai. And she was a great saint of devotion, and she was a princess, and she was just always composing these, as you all know, beautiful bhajans to her beloved Krishna, singing to the Lord. And she was married to a prince, a noble man, and she she would always be, and he wasn't interested in chanting with her or going into her puja room, and she would always pray, "Oh Lord, let my husband learn to love you, let my husband learn to love you." Well, her husband was, Master told this story, her husband was actually a greater devotee than she, but he kept his devotion in his own heart. And one evening he was sleeping and she heard him saying in his sleep, "Oh, my beloved Lord, oh, my beloved Lord." And she was so excited. She said, "Oh, my husband, you love God as much as I do. I'm so happy we can share this." And he said, "I beg you, don't say another word." And she said, "How can I not speak? This is the fulfillment of my prayers. Now I see you are a great devotee of God." And he said, "I'm so sorry you said that, because I made a promise to the Lord. My love for him was so deep, but if another person ever found out about it, I would leave my body. And now that you've talked about it, I must leave my body." And he consciously exited. And so the point being, we can't always tell. People may say, "Oh, I'm not spiritual, I'm devotional, not devotional," but we don't know what's in their hearts. So give everyone the respect and the appreciation, particularly your spouses or family members, and try to include them quietly and unobtrusively in your devotion. So I think...
signaling or something.
Shall we just try to... Did you want to make announcements or something?
My question
Oh.
is to both Jyotish Ji and Devi Ji. What spiritual hurdles you faced when you were initially on this path?
Okay,
How much time do you have?
Yes. I'll repeat the question. What spiritual hurdles did we face when we were initially on this path? As Devi implied, there are lots and lots of them. I think the first hurdle that I had was self-discipline. It's difficult to establish a practice of meditation that is steady and unwavering. And so I had learned to meditate, but I had a lot of different pulls in my life, and it took a while. It took some months before I was able to discipline myself to meditate at least once a day, and then gradually more than that. I would say another early difficulty, early hurdle was, for me, lack of devotion. I was very interested in truth and in the mental aspect of it, but it took me a long time to not only develop, but to deepen my sense of devotion. Devotion is just love of the heart for that which is higher, love of the heart for God. And so my mind was active, my mind was committed, but it took a while to develop a deeper and deeper sense of love for God and for the gurus. And then I would say the final one probably is doubt, was doubt. I don't have much of it anymore, maybe none of it. But whether the practices really work, or does God care, and all those little questions, those little doubts that come into the mind, gradually you just have to either deal with them, or sometimes if they're too big, you put them on the shelf. And sometimes you go back and have to deal with them. But often I've found that if you put a doubt on the shelf, it's like a jug of water that you can't swallow at that time. You put it on the shelf and you go back, okay, now I'm ready to swallow it, and you find out that it's evaporated. And so you don't have to deal with it. So some of those doubts, it's better not to confront, because your faith is not strong enough. Your mind is not strong enough. I was reading recently something with a biography of Lahiri Mahashaya, and he posed this question: is A photo of me, is that a photo printed on a piece of paper, or is that my living essence there? Think of that. Which is it? It's both. And it is whatever you think it is. If you think that a photo is a photo, that's what it is. If you think that a photo is the living presence of God and Guru, then that's what it is. So Master said, if you think me near, I will be near. So one of the hurdles is being able to get control over your mind so that you're able to get your mind to go along with your aspirations. And I'll let Devi speak for herself.
Thank you. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question before, but it's... I thought you were going to say you never had it. No. It will take me a long time to think about all of them. But I think for me, the first one, I had come from, I was fortunate to have a very loving, harmonious family, very nice home, many good friends. And then when I decided I really wanted to be on the spiritual path, and I came to Ananda, I realized I had to leave all that. And it was really, there were periods of deep personal loneliness and uncertainty if this is really what I wanted to do. Yoganandaji calls it the familial warmth, leaving the familial warmth. And that was hard for me. And I really, some part of me, I remember the first winter I was there thinking, oh, I should just go back. I could go back to my home and I'd be welcomed warmly and wholeheartedly. And I was tempted to do that, truly. But then something else in me said, you could go back to everything that's familiar and comfortable, but you would get to the same point again at some point in your life where you really said, I want to seek God. Why not just keep going forward instead of taking a detour and going out? And so that was the first test for me, to really accept I have to walk this path alone, and people may not understand, they may not support me, it may be a lonely journey, but I don't see a choice because I feel that's what I have to do inside. So that was one of the first ones. Another one, I think, was I felt very inadequate spiritually. I would look at other people and I would think, oh, they're so spiritual and they're so, they meditate for long hours, and I just felt, like the dumbest kid in the class, and I felt unworthy spiritually, and then finally I just sort of came to terms with that, well, maybe I am, the last one in line here, but I know I'm sincere, and so I'm going to just keep trying. So that was a big one too, just to think I wasn't worthy to be on the spiritual path. I wasn't worthy to really do this wholeheartedly. And then I think finally, and really we could go on at length, because it isn't like you just finish these hurdles. 5 years down the road, you have different hurdles. But I think in the beginning was just the need to try to get a grasp on my life. Well, where am I going with all this? Where will this really lead me if I give my life wholeheartedly to God? So I guess you could say it's doubt of the spiritual path. Instead of just having the faith to say, I don't know where it's going to take me, but I know I have no choice but to go forward. So I think uncertainty about the long-term, making a long-term life commitment. So I think those were things that I dealt with in the early first coming on the path.
Hello, namaste. Thanks, we are all blessed to have you here and your insights on peace and other varied subjects. I just want to show that standard way of dealing with other people in our daily lives. Most of us, I guess, that, I mean, we think if we don't take a stand on a particular issue or anything, if we don't show our anger, if we don't shout at other people, or if we kind of make an impact, make a statement on them, then things gonna get awfully bad the very next day or in the coming future. So why not let it out now and here only? So what's
okay.
the...
I think we get the question. Do you want to go or should... Okay. You know, there's, of course, that's a question that, did everyone understand and hear the question? If you're in a conflict with another person, shouldn't we just respond and get it out? Because otherwise, if we repress it, it'll just get worse. Well, there's several points to that. One, I remember in that great movie Gandhi, where he was, you know, the passive or the nonviolent movement, and he said there's a difference between being passive and being nonviolent. And if you stand up for your beliefs, we can't be passive, but we need to be strong in our convictions. So if people sense that there is a deep integrity, I remember Jyotish telling a story that his father was a man of deep honesty, never told a lie. He was an architect, and one day a man came into his office and accused him of falsifying some information for his own benefit. And Jyotish said it was the only time he saw his father really react, and he very calmly but very powerfully looked at that man and he said, "I have never told a lie in my life, now get out of my office." And the man left, and he just dropped the whole thing. So there's the power of conviction. We don't have to just say, oh, okay, well, maybe you're right, maybe I did. You know, we have to stand up, but we don't have to stand up in such a way that it just is like, you know, more anger going back and forth. And then the second point to make, they've actually done, I mean, the current psychology tells us, well, if we repress our emotions, then it just builds up inside and it causes problems. They've actually done studies that people that have, there was a group of people that had been laid off. This was in, I believe it was in Detroit, Michigan. So some factory workers, a big group of them, have been laid off from their jobs, very abruptly, not fairly done, and so forth. And they divided this group into 3 groups. One group, they let them talk to a therapist and really just get it out and get their anger out and all that. The second group, let me see if I can remember it properly. They did nothing with the second group. And the third group,
And the third group, they had sessions where they asked them to put themselves in the place of management and think of how they would have handled this difficult situation where the company was losing money and they were still trying to work with the workers. And so then later on they tested the group that they helped to see the viewpoint of the other person that they were angry with. They were the calmest and happiest 6 weeks later. The group that they did nothing with was second, and the group that they helped to express their anger, they were still angry. And so we have this idea that I'm going to get rid of the poison within me by expressing it. But anger or reaction is not a poison that we can get rid of. It is a reactive process. And if you want to overcome your reactive process, you don't do that by reacting more. And so the question about whether we should confront something or not, the real answer to that is how reactive are you? If you're angry and you've got to really tell that person something, let it alone. Try to see it from their viewpoint. If you're very calm and very loving and you feel that that person is incorrect, then you will have the self-control to wait for the time that that person is able to hear what you have to say. But if they're yelling at you and you yell back, you're helping neither yourself nor them, because they're not in a position. So you ask the question about the next day it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse if you make it worse. It's going to get better if you don't make it worse, but actually calm yourself down and then work with it the next day.
Well, I think we've kind of gone over our time, and I know there's refreshments, so maybe we should close. Thank you all for coming.